I'm Carl. I'm your friendly CyberBrokers leftover and one of the co-hosts for tonight. Merck, who is also our co-host and DJ and fellow DGen. Oh, there we go. He's in. Merck, say hi.
Hi.
There we go. Chris, Brooke, and Brianna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Brooke. I head up operations at CyberBrokers, which means just kind of like helping with the daily business operations.
I'm Brianna. I do marketing. I assist Brooke with ops, and I manage the writers' room at CyberBrokers.
Indeed. And then I am Chris. I am basically the lore master for CyberBrokers.
Great. It's nice to see some or hear some new voices tonight. I could look forward to hearing different perspectives based upon that as well. Welcome. This is the third series of the lore listening parties. It's an opportunity for those that are new to learn about the lore or storyline that is the foundation of CyberBrokers. For the rest, opportunity to catch up, re-enjoy the richness of the lore chapters. Each of these events will have special guest hosts. They're going to provide commentary, background, or their own personal perspectives on the chapters we're covering for this event. Once we listen to the chapter, we'll switch into community mode. We'll bring up members of the audience who would like to ask questions or share their own thoughts about the lore from that chapter. People could also post in CB Lore and Discord if they're not comfortable coming up. So as you're listening and you have questions, pop it in CB Lore. I'll be listening there just to make sure to catch those as well. At the very end, there'll be some quick announcements and then instructions on how to get entered into the giveaway for today. You can find past recordings on Twitter and also the new CyberBrokers YouTube channel. Make sure to go check that out. So tonight, we're going back to Chapter 3, which was released in February of this year. And it was actually the week right before CyberBrokers Mint. We left off with Spice and Ken finishing their business with Altair, the Politician, in Tombstone. And we got introduced to Zinc. So Chris, Brianna, Brooke, this must have been a really busy time for CyberBrokers. The week before Mint, can you give us any insights on what was going on internally at the time?
Yeah, week before Mint, oh boy. Let me go back in time here. It was extremely busy time. This was right around the time when I actually joined the CyberBrokers team, about a week and a half before Mint. So we were mostly focused on just checking all 10,001 CyberBrokers and generating them, regenerating them, tweaking them to look pretty. So that's where our head was at, is oh gosh, we got to get through all 10,001. This is taking way longer than expected, kind of tweaking that generator to kind of account for new rules that we were adding to it. This shirt doesn't necessarily look that great with, this other accessory, things like that. So in terms of the chapter though, I think Chris, you would know better. I'm not sure if this chapter was written beforehand or if this is something that you had to finalize right before it went out.
Yeah, so we this was one of the ones we had in the can, meaning we had it staged up and ready to go, and we wanted to drop it right before, because nobody remembers this, but we actually postponed the launch because as we were digging in and cleaning up all the brokers, it was a lot of work. It was more work than we thought it was going to be, and so. This was just a chapter that we had ready to go the week before, actually, but we wanted to make sure that it was because chapter 4 was coming. We wanted people to have time to sit with this chapter, right? So this one is all about kind of building up to our cool chapter 4 pivot. But anyway. This was done early, thank goodness, because during the launch we had all the crazy assembly of all the brokers and all that stuff. Yep.
So I hear a little bit about a story, and I apologize for outing with this, but I'd love to hear more details about it. So there's a story about Brooke getting kidnapped and not being allowed to leave until she did some stuff.
I mean, yes, I was definitely kidnapped by Josie. The story is true. Like we had been in talks for a while about me helping the CyberBrokers project and working with her, but it was like a frantic call one day, like, Brooke, like, what will it take for you to come over to my condo and just pull an all-nighter with me and help me hammer out like all of these things? You know, we have this like launch coming up. We need to like get all this stuff done. I need help. And I was like, okay, let's do this. So I went over to Josie's like condo and I didn't leave for almost like 2 days. And we just powered through all the things. And I got like the most rapid onboarding to the CyberBrokers universe as I possibly could have had. And yeah, little did I know that was the first all-nighter of many all-nighters that I would have for the next like week and a half leading to launch. But it was honestly really fun. We made it really entertaining. We would blast fun music. We were just like pouring through all the accessories, assembling them. I was getting like her vision and trying to like replicate what Josie would do when assembling a cyberbroker. But like, you know what the hardest part was is Josie does not drink caffeine. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't be at this house and work. There's no coffee pots. There's nothing. So I had to like continually order Red Bulls and coffee like the entire time. But yeah, it was fun.
That's so cool. Was there any like combinations that like stuck out that were like, oh my God, this is cool, but it won't work, that like didn't get in? And anything, little tidbits like that you remember?
So I can't remember something that I thought was cool but wouldn't work, but I do remember my favorite talent to help assemble was like the chef talent, just because like I just had so much fun with that white and red color scheme and like throwing in a bunch of red hairstyles into the mix to like really match that. It was just like a really fun one to put together for me. We spent a lot of time on the talents with the more rare talents, I would say, to like kind of curate them and kind of like hand pick certain pairings than we did with probably the larger talents. But yeah, that was like one of the first ones that I worked on.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts about that time, right? Because I wrote the code that did the random generation, right, of all the talents and all of their clothing and stuff. And what I did is I imported this Google spreadsheet that Brooke and the team, like Jocelyn, like everybody's working in this Google spreadsheet, kind of pulling together basic rules and names and all the things, and I imported it into my my little JavaScript Node.js thing, and it just clicked around and it spit out all the different brokers. But because it was guided random, the brokers that would pop out, all the different clothing options that would come were unintended, right? They were things that we didn't really design, but since it was in the bucket of random generation, right? They would come out, and it was surprisingly cool. All these, like, if you look at Zinc, for example, or not Zinc, but Ken, for example, he's got a crazy arm, like puffy sleeve thing, and like it doesn't look like it would ever match. And so for him specifically, like he popped out and it was close to that, but not quite. And I'm like, oh my gosh, because it gives you so much inspiration when you have these random things that you would never think to combine, and you're like, oh, of course that's going to clash. And then it pops out and you're like, ooh, that's really cool. And then you start like tweaking and playing with them. But it was very intense, for sure, because we've got 10, and nobody realizes how much time it's going to take to manually look at 10,000 of anything. Like it is, because you don't want, garbage going out, obviously. And so like all 10,000 of them, we had our eyes may have been sleepy because we did like a bunch of overnighters, but like we put eyes on all 10,000 of them.
Okay, I think we're ready to queue up the chapter and listen to the first part of chapter 3, and then we can get into more details about the chapter specifically. Merc.
CyberBrokers, how a paradigm shift became the paradigm lost. Project Paradigm, Chapter 3. The cascade of particles flowed over the edge and crashed to the ground in a neon burst of emissive material. As digital hadrons splashed into a pool of pixelated flotsam, Moss Falls attracted hordes of TPL explorers eager to slip behind the curtain. The falls were visible for kilometers all around, existing far off the trail. The segmented peak laddered high into the sky in defiance of classical physics. At its base, behind the maelstrom of falling particles, of course, there existed a secret cave. Why are you having me look in the cave behind Moss Falls? Spice, geared in her less conspicuous power armor instead of piloting judgment, rested her hands on her hips. That'd be the dumbest place to secretly fence fished coin. Hundreds of explorers hunt in there every day, armed to the helm, waiting on the next moss spawn. No, not that cave, unironic Ken chuckled over comms. There's a secret pocket cave on a higher platform about 800 meters up. You can't see it because it's behind the upper particles. Really? A second secret waterfall cave. Spice craned her helmeted head and squinted upward. Apparently, said Ken, I found out about it from a Spectre friend of mine. Spice jerked her head around and focused back in the direction where she'd left him, just outside the PvP zone. Wait, you're friends with a Spectre? Well, maybe the word friend is a little strong. Ah, yeah. Well then, I guess I'll just try not to get myself demezed. Ken snorted and said, good plan. Spice approached the base of Moss Falls and bounded over the roiling pool of liquid synesthesia, bursting through the sparkling curtain. The boots of her power suit crunched against the ground inside as she landed behind the falls. Standing around were half a dozen toons, similarly armored up and nervously waiting for the next mob spawn. Just out of curiosity, Ken, how long before the next spawn block time? Spice ignored the group of brokers and drifters and scanned the roof of the cavern for grips. In the next 10 blocks or so. Why? There are a bunch of campers in there. Yep. She moved closer to the mouth of the cave and zoomed her optics to a slightly disjointed outcropping. It looked out of place, almost like a grip or some other handhold, extruded in such a way as to be nearly invisible in the poor light. The sound of exploding crystals pierced the closeness of the cave, and an enormous drifter came bounding in through the falling particles to land 2 meters away from Spice. The giant straightened and glared an unvoiced challenge to everyone standing around. 3 blocks remaining to spawn time, came Ken's voice over the comms. Satisfied the handhold in the ceiling was her target, Spice shot a look over her shoulder. As soon as the moss spawned, this place was going to overflow with violence, giving her the perfect opportunity to disappear. So, I was thinking, she started. A flash, and a lush pile of living moss popped into existence atop the pillar in the center of the cave, and the place erupted in action. The giant, moving faster than anyone expected, looped a flaming plasma axe around in a long arc, demezzing the drifter in front of him who'd been sprinting to the pillar. The sound of rocket boots flared, and what looked like an astronomer vaulted towards the moss. Gunfire cracked, and a second drifter went down in a splintering of neon as they, too, demezzed. Someone flung a glowing blade at Spice, and she smoothly ducked beneath the weapon. Anyway, as I was saying, do you remember Altair's guy, Zinc? I think I want to ping him. Spice leaped onto the back of the giant and used his sudden, surprise lurching motion to catapult herself up to the grip. Her hand punctured the outer geometry like it was an illusion, and her fingers wrapped around a solid rung hidden beneath. She smiled. What do you mean, ping him? Why? Ken's voice wavered. A masked Gunter lined up Spice in their rifle sights, but she flipped her legs up and caught the lip of the next outcropping on the upper opening of the cave. A bolt of energy sizzled through the air where her waist and legs had just hung. I think I want to go out on a date with him. The Gunter shifted and lined up a second rifle blast, completely ignoring the spawn camping melee around them. Instead, they chose to focus on Spice. But you can't date a broker, squeaked unironic Ken. Spice frowned and, while hanging upside down by her left boot, pivoted her .30 caliber out of its quick-release holster and fired from her hip. The shot struck the Gunter 10 centimeters beneath their beret, demezzing them instantly. Good riddance, jerk, she muttered. What? Oh, not you, Ken. She reholstered her weapon. Sorry. Spice flipped up and twisted to grab at the outer wall where she guessed the next handhold would be. Her hand found a small crevice, still hidden from sight, but above the mouth of the moss cave. She pulled and began her swift, suit-powered climb up the backside of the particle falls. So you're saying you'd actually consider dating a broker? Sure. Why not? If the Spectre had been right, she had around another 200 meters and a separate platform yet to traverse. Well, we'll outlive you, for one. Sure. But you're still a person with feelings, right? Why shouldn't you get to experience a little romance? Silence oozed from the comlink. Ken? Sorry, I was just looking at the map. You should see a 15-meter gap off to your left. The second cave will be right there. Spice hit the top of her climb and pulled herself up over the ledge. A separate, large section of moss falls floating free from any physical constraints loomed 15 meters away, angled back toward the main tower. Do you have eyes on it? Sure do, she replied. A trail of handholds led up the side of the cliff and wound over to what looked like a potential ledge a couple hundred meters further up on the wall. She was pretty sure she could make that jump. Powered legs stormed toward the gap, and she sprung out into open space, soaring to cross the distance and slammed into the wall. Spice scrabbled for the handholds, slipped, and scrabbled some more. She wedged one of her boots into a crack, stopped her slide, and hoisted herself to the next stable handhold. Too easy, she mumbled around a long exhale. Spice looked over her shoulder, down into empty, yawning space below, and then back upward. From her angle, she could confirm that the path of carved handholds indeed led to a second secret cave behind the falls. I made the jump. I can even see our target location from this part of the wall. Affirmative, came Ken's monotone reply. Great. She hated when he got like this. He wasn't going to be any fun until the next time she logged in. Of all people, she thought he'd understand how a person's background didn't affect how she felt about them. To her, it didn't matter if someone was a broker or a drifter. He'd known her long enough by now. He ought to have realized that. Ken shouldn't be mad or surprised. Moving in, she growled. Again, silence was the reply. Spice refocused and started moving up the wall. The last few meters fell away faster as she further familiarized herself with the grip pattern of the climb. She hoisted herself up over the final edge and was met by half a dozen drifters, not a broker in sight. They bounced to their feet and reached for weapons. It was the group of coin thieves she was looking for. She recognized the leader from his gram in the mission file. Let me guess. You were expecting a Gunter, she said. A look of confusion passed between several of the drifters. A couple of them nodded. What are you doing here? Said the leader. Her eyebrows drew tight together. She slipped her barrage rifle from its holster and whispered, Unfortunately for you, penance.
Okay. As usual, so much covered. A new location, Moss Falls. We got Ken being friends with a Spectre, drifters and brokers fighting, coin thieves, and Spice interested in dating Zinc. Okay, Chris, help us out with how you fit all this in here already.
Yeah. I do love this. It's a funny thing, that opening description of the falls, like that, there's like 4 or 5 sentences there. I've like combed over that so many times for like an hour trying to like fit all the words in there that I wanted to have this like super dense, highly visual, string of thoughts. Those 2 paragraphs right there are literally the most work I've done on, like, the hardest work I've done on all of the lore, like just squishing that description of Moss Falls. And I love the way Robin, like, or Supermassive, when he reads it, and he navigates that language, like all of the fun, high, sky, defiance, like all this internal rhyme stuff, and the cadence, like he does such a good job at it. This is my favorite thing he's ever read. But yeah, one of the tricks I used is to layer their banter over the top of the action, right? So, in the action, it's sort of video game MMO. A bunch of people are spawn camping around some loot, and the secret hidden, there's a combat, and like introducing little elements of sort of the plot on this particular section. But over the top of that, that's where I've got them talking. So it's kind of cheating in that I'm doubling up the amount of story I can tell, because they're smashed on top of each other, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for the backstory on that. Brianna, I know you came in after this, but being in the writer's room, you all must have looked back at these chapters and had some personal impressions. Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, so this was before I joined the team, but it was after this chapter that I actually ended up reaching out to Chris about the lore, because I was just so like enraptured by this whole universe. And I think one of the things I mentioned to Chris when I first talked to him about this was like I loved like there's all these like little details like that have been layered in just these 3 chapters. So like last chapter we had this look at like leftovers and their place in the universe. Like clearly like the politicians are talking down to like Ken because he's a leftover. And then in this chapter there's like this politics of like Spice is a drifter, she wants to date a broker. Like what does that mean when brokers can, in this sense, at this point they're living forever essentially, they're cryogenically frozen, but like Spice is a drifter, she lives in the real world. So when I read, like, I'm a big sci-fi fan, and obviously I think CyberBrokers is kind of tends towards that line, but I loved already, like, it's not just about like the sci-fi fantasy aspect, like the characters are being built super well, like the world building, there's all these politics, like interpersonal relationships, and obviously I think everyone likes a good romance as well, which we kind of start getting hints at in this too. But yeah, this like chapter 3 was like when I really was like, oh my gosh, like I need to reach out to the guy who's writing this lore, because I was so in love with the story and the world that was already being built only 3 chapters in.
Yeah, that was funny. So her email showed up in my inbox, and at that point I was so busy because we were getting ready to launch, and like all the things we were talking about, right? And I did not have time to properly respond or whatever, and God bless you, Brianna. she kept like sending me an email. Oh hey, just checking in, and I'd respond to her. I'm like, okay, I'm really busy, but please don't let me forget. And so like that's how she joined the team, right? Is because she was just on top of it, and like I could tell early on that she was a rock star, and I'm just like, okay, I got to get around to this. And eventually, obviously, we got back and got her in the writer's room and got her onboarded in the team and did all that stuff. But it was literally because she had very, very good stuff to say. Because I asked her to critique these first 3 chapters, and like I tell everybody, she very nearly guessed what the plot twist is, right? And I was just like, oh my gosh, like she gets it, she understands it. And so like I knew in my head, I'm like, okay, we got to have her in, but I just didn't have time to like set that up and get her in for an interview and all this. Like it was so much work to do all that. So I am eternally grateful that she kept reminding me.
Yeah,
Now,
it was
Brooke,
like funny just how like it all ended up working out. But yeah, I have to thank Chris and the lore for really like immersing me and like sucking me in. And that combined with just the awesome art. I think it really just transports you to a whole other world.
Now, Brooke, did you get a chance to read this, or were you too busy dealing with names and outfits?
I did read it, and I was really happy to kind of like read this love triangle forming, because I think I had messaged Chris and was like, oh my gosh, like I want to Spice and kind of start dating, and he was like, just read the chapter, see what happens. So I was happy to like see that in there for
Oh
sure.
my God, I had forgotten about that, because like that was before this chapter. She's like, ooh, they should start dating, and I had this chapter. I was like, he, you know, yeah. Just wait. It was awesome.
Thank you again for sharing. I'm sure the community loves these little details, just like the details in the chapters. These little extra details add so much to the enjoyment of it. For timing reasons, I think we're gonna go back to the second part so we can get to community questions. So, Merck, could you cue up the second half for us?
The obstacle course lay before them in a 2-kilometer loop, littered with broken mech remains, each mangled by various flame gouts, blades, and crushing blocks. The go light at the gate flicked to yellow as the next heat lined up to tackle the track. The Mech Pilot Olympics was one of Spice's guilty pleasures. Most of Pleasant society frowned on the brutality and spectacle. Whales tended to love their competitions with fewer explosions and higher speeds. But Spice, she loved the raw appeal to the everyman. That, and she occasionally picked up a trick or two to replicate in her alpha command work. Thanks for pinging me. Zinc fidgeted in his seat next to her. She guessed he spent more time with Altair and his highbrow brokers, and less time down here in the pits with all the drifters. Of course, she replied, gesturing at his leftover gear. I'm just glad to see you out of your suit. Zinc chuckled. Well, as long as you don't mind me being distracted by all the mixed res textures out there, this place is mismatched resolution stacked on top of mismatched resolution, and it's making me twitch. Zinc's talent was cleanup crew. Primarily, they were employed to repair and upgrade older bits of TPL's simulation assets to newer, more modern standards. Since the world was constantly in motion with new drops, it was a never-ending job. Good thing, as a broker, he was available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The starting horn blared, and 3 giant mechs blasted out of the gate. One of the racers, a behemoth 450H, while slower than its opponents, was reinforced with hard armor shielding, sacrificing speed for the ability to mostly ignore any fire or slashing obstacles. Spice usually wagered on behemoth-class mechs to win. She usually lost. What do you think? Spice waved at the giant hydraulic crusher on the course near their seats. It's great. A bit violent, and Zinc nodded to the drifters sitting a row away. Not my usual crowd. I appreciate you slumming down here with me. Zinc winked back. At least I'm not worried for my safety. A huge grin split her face. I wonder why that is. Well, obviously it's because you fight pretty good. Smiling, she nodded and turned back to the race. The behemoth was falling behind.
Okay, so you set it up and boom, Spice and Zinc on a date. Now, personally, I'm conflicted because there's also mechanomics in the middle of all that as well. And so there's like 2 huge topics here, in relation to what's coming up, mechs, and the love triangle. Chris, any comments on both of those?
Yeah. So at this point we knew we were dropping mechs, obviously, and all the things. And I wanted to kind of explore what it meant to have a mech, because up until now, I really only saw Spices, right? And we wanted to show that there were more than just the Alpha Command mechs, right? So there's that. And then we also wanted to demonstrate there's more to mechs than just fighting, right? Like, so this is a big obstacle course racetrack thing. And that part is super important, because I'm I'm a game developer at heart, right? And one of my pet peeves is that games tend to just primarily be about fighting stuff. And it's always so much more fun when you can work in interesting ways to introduce competition and, you know, conflict and things like that without like, oh, I'm going to shoot a gun at you, pew pew, you know. But this is our chance to kind of like set that up as a thing. And then the Ken Spice date, right? Like there are layers there that are fun because, you know, she's kind of a blue collar sort of person, and he's kind of a white collar kind of person and hanging out, you know. That's why, you know, the whole slumming, sitting down with the the mouth breathers, right? And it's I just wanted to like play on that dichotomy over the course of this date, right? And that he is kind of a he's nervous and what's the word? Not self-deprecating, but he's not very self-assured, whatever that word is. Somebody tell me. But he's anxious, like talking to her, and you kind of see that core bit of his personality that kind of threads through the rest of the chapters, right? Where he's, you know, sometimes apathetic and nihilistic and all these things, and it's because he doesn't have any of this this internal self-confidence happening. But you get to see that in, you know, later on you get to see that in like more action-y kind of things, dangerous situations, but you get to see it here in this sort of relationship situation, right? And so it was really fun to just kind of dig into the interplay between those two, while again something crazy is happening in the background. Like there's this big giant mech battle race, robots crashing into things. So
well, and it's interesting the way you mention that, because, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff you could like infer from that, because Zinc, you know, has that different group. It's the politicians group, the people who are running things group, and he's probably present at a lot of things with that group, but he probably doesn't actually like talk or interact in there. He's just there.
Exactly.
You know, and so that kind of plays into the not confident, because he doesn't have this level of interaction with people usually.
Yeah, because he's out there like fixing pixels, right? That's like he's sort of got this this tunnel vision as to, and I love how we get to talk about that here in this chapter, right? Because you can feel him just being itchy about the all the crazy mixed match art and stuff laying around. Again, kind of pulling from, you know, my game development background, right? Is setting this as a job in the metaverse, right? As somebody whose job is to go around and upgrade all of because if you think about that, like the metaverse is going to be built by a bunch of disparate people, and they're all going to, you know, be depending on when they were built and what technology was available at the time, what things, and like it's work to go back and up-res all of this stuff. And so like having this job type in CyberBrokers in the TPL, right, to be able to do that was a large piece of Zinc's whole character.
Brooke and Brianna, I'm curious what you thought about the concept of brokers dating drifters that came up here, and that was kind of a little bit of a twist too. You kind of got a feel for it in chapter 2 with foreshadowing, but then it happens. So I was curious how you guys reacted to that.
Well, I think like how I was mentioning it brings up this interesting concept, right? Of like what happens when, like, in theory, one person can like live endlessly and one person can't. And I remember trying to be like process that, like what that would look like, and like what does that mean, right? Like there's probably all these like societal norms in TPL. Like that's what basically we've introduced here, that like we're in this metaverse, but there's still kind of these, you know, expectations of you and things that are considered not like normal, which I think grounds the TPL in a way. Like you can relate to it in a sense that there's still like kind of all these pressures, and like I think Spice coming out and being like, I don't care, like I like, you know, I don't care if they're a drifter or a broker, I like them for who they are. I think it also speaks a lot to like Spice, and like we'll get to know her as like the chapters go on. But I remember reading this and being like, I like Spice. Like I like how she like approaches life, and like, you know, especially like seeing her stark reality of her job in the real world and then coming into TPL. I think you get a really good look into kind of the type of character Spice is going to be, and like how she's going to approach kind of all the conflict that starts coming after this.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I guess like originally I was like, yeah, of course, like it shouldn't be that big of a deal, right? But you start to actually think what it would be like if your partner was living forever and you weren't, and I can I can see all the issues that would cause. I mean, like if you were living forever, you know, time doesn't mean the same thing as it does for someone whose life isn't infinite. So you're just like operating on completely different planes. So I understand why that would be difficult, but I do think it speaks to Spice's character and, you know, Zinc's character, that they're like, you know, they're kind of just living in the moment. They're interested in each other. They're just kind of like, you know, taking it day by day. And I think that's special that they're able to just kind of like do that. And, you know, I'm surprised. I think Unironic Ken's reaction to like Spice doing that was less of like, oh, I can't believe like you would, you know, date a cyberbroker. Like, you know, I think it was more of like jealousy. Like he just didn't think that she would, and he had maybe wanted to be that person for her. That's kind of how I interpreted it.
Yeah, I think what I love about these first three chapters is it makes you think your own questions about it. So it's connecting enough that you're going through these thought processes yourself. You don't have answers necessarily from the story, but you're thinking it like yourself. Like for me, I was thinking, you know, this is part of, you know, the hope piece of love stories. You know, there's the possibility. So, you know, brokers were real people at one point. Why couldn't there be hope that, you know, Spice could, or a drifter could live forever eventually if they fix the problem, right? I've got a question from chat. Now that the TPL has introduced dating, will we see coupling and children down the road? It would be interesting to see if CB would adapt and evolve that way.
That's an interesting question. So we so relationships are going to be very important, especially for the rest of this first cycle that we're doing. It's basically the story of Spice, right? And okay. I'm trying not to give away stuff. But yes, let's see. Let me try to answer the question. So yes, relationships are going to be important. Children is an interesting thought because in the real world, obviously you have to be in the real world to make babies. Newsflash for everybody. Spoiler. But because anything created in the metaverse, right, is going to be like a little AI baby or something, maybe. Like it would be a little strange, right? That it wouldn't be a real human. And up until now, we've got this conflict that we're building between AIs and humans, and so we don't. I mean, again, trying not to spoil anything. But the whole fact of having children, we'll go with real children, I think is an interesting thought, because in the real world, they're all these little tribes are spread out across the world. The population is low. You don't have a lot of local choices, right? People don't really know their neighbors because they spend all their time socializing in TPL. And so if that's the case, then you don't really need to interact with anybody in the real world, right? And that's kind of the way we've set it up in this kind of dystopian part. But like, that is definitely a thing we're playing on. I mean, you can see it here between Zinc and Spice, but the relationships between, brokers versus drifters, and how that gets affected, because you'll never meet a broker in real life, right? Because they're like stuck in a cryo tube or whatever. And so how does that work? Like, there are all kinds of questions around all of this. And we will definitely answer some of them going forward. For sure.
So I forgot to credit, that was Zoom Van. Great question, Zoom Van. Chat is having some fun on Babynomics when. Dreamer has an affair with an incumbent when. Joker babies with the masks.
That's amazing.
So they're having all sorts of fun with the potential of that concept.
Yep. That's funny.
And I just want to say, like, I've loved, like, this is obviously the beginning of the, Spice, Ken, Zinc, love triangle. Like, the communities, like, I just have loved seeing the Team Ken, Team Zinc, like, chats. Like, we're all, just like, so everyone knows, like, we're always reading and, like, watching. And, like, I know in the writer's room, like, we've spent a lot of time going back and forth about this whole love triangle and what's going to happen. But I think it just, like, attests to kind of, like, the setup you've had, Chris, of, like, people have loved choosing sides in this. And it's been, I think, really fun writing it. And it's also been really fun, I think, just as a community, kind of, like, picking sides and going back and forth. So I think this is kind of the start of all of that, right? The picking teams.
Yeah. And I love, like, that's one of the best things about building the story in real time, because we can then lean into that. Because it's not like a thing where we have the entire story scripted out front to back before we publish it, right? We have, a few sort of milestone targets that we're trying to make our way there. It's kind of like a D&D campaign. It's like, I always say that, right? But, sometimes the players want to go left, and you're like, all right, well, I guess we're going left, and you kind of just make shit up as you go, going left, right? So that's how we're writing all this. And so when we run into something like Team Ken versus, Team Zinc, that's a moment where we're like, all right, well, I guess we're going left, right? Because everybody's loving this, and it literally influences the direction of the story, and it's so much fun.
Yeah, so we're always watching, we're, like, gauging what the community's thinking. Obviously, the quests have a big impact on the story, but like Chris said, that's, like, the fun part about writing this. And, like, we have, like, now the broker auditions, we have the writers room of great community members who have awesome ideas. But it's been cool kind of seeing how just, like, the community as a whole has influenced even just this love triangle in the next upcoming chapters.
So I want to switch gears a little bit, because mechs become very important right after this. And those of us that are big into mechanomics and trying to predict what's coming, look at little tidbits. And, there was a lot of little mech tidbits in here about Spice, favoring Behemoth, and, pilot Olympics, mechs racing each other, and how different mechs reacted differently. So I was curious if you could comment about how much of that was set up versus just color?
That's a good question. Because we knew we wanted variety, right? Like, and we've really only given up until now a glimpse of what was happening. But we knew we wanted variety around all of this. And so like leaning on the Mech Olympics, sort of like what I alluded to earlier, it gave us a chance to explore the different kinds of mechs. You know, you've got like more overall good mechs, you've got speed mechs, you've got tough tank mechs, you've got like, there's this concept of, you know, the obstacle, like we wanted all of that to kind of, yes, it's color, obviously, because, you know, building a narrative around those things is fun, but we also wanted to sort of set the table to where these kinds of things could live, right? And that's a big theme overall with everything that we're writing is, you know, as we explore different areas of TPL and we are giving the audience slash our holders slash people who love CyberBrokers, we're giving them space to imagine or write their own stories or whatever. So like the purpose is really twofold. One is, I mean, I guess threefold. One is to tell a good story. But one is to give our fans somewhere where they can build their own stories, right? So we scaffold up these places where they can do that. And then the third part of that is like, oh, here's the kind of stuff that mechs are going to eventually behave like. Granted, like I said, these are just like a tiny little slice of what we've actually got going on with mechs. So, like I'm thoroughly enjoying the mechanomics of it all. Like as and again, you never know. Some of that may influence our decisions as we're tweaking things on the back end. So press on with that for sure.
Cool. I don't see any more questions. So, Brooke, anything else you want to add about Chapter 3 that touched something specifically for you, or any reactions you'd like to share?
I guess I can say I just really love the waterfall scene. I think that's such a fun like visual, and Chrissy did such a great job with like describing the waterfall. Actually, we decided to use an illustration of the waterfall at our recent New York event. And if anyone hasn't seen that, you should definitely go check that out. We can repost that because it makes a great phone background because it's just so colorful and beautiful and vivid. So I'm excited to see what other locations in TPL pop up. But that one's my favorite. So
Chris, you want to lead off with any final comments about Chapter 3? Sure.
One of the Chapter 3 is actually a really good example of what we're trying to do with the story, right? Because we want to mix in emotional impact with high action, and in a fairly limited space, right? Because we only have a couple thousand words for each one of these chapters, and so it's from a form versus function, right, perspective. The form it's taking is driving a lot of this this action plus drama, like relationship drama stuff. And so that, like, personally, I just think that makes a better story, right? And going forward, all of the stories have that sort of template where there's something just crazy happening, but layered on top of that, we've got these real emotional relationship sort of things that we're tackling. And it is probably one of my favorite parts about all of this writing and the writer's room and what they're working at. And like, yes, we have these detailed, fantastical worlds and they're beautiful and all these things, but we also have, you know, real relationships between people in there, which makes it stickier. it makes it better.
Yeah, I just definitely want to just reiterate what Chris said, that I think you're starting to really get a sense of the characters here, and you're kind of starting to like really feel like, you know, they're your friends, or like they're part of your group as well. And I think as this goes on, you know, not just this story, but the next story and the next, like Chris said, I think the characters are super important to this. And I think getting the community involved as well. Like the community I like to think of is like the community as a whole is like almost another character in this as well. And I just am loving seeing just where the story is going to go from here, and even where it's going to go in the future.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm just going to echo what Chris and Brianna said there, and just really enjoyed the lore listening party. It's so fun to go back and like re-listen to the chapters, and because you pick up on new things every time, I think. So yeah, I'm glad we did this.
Okay. Chris, Brianna, Brooke, appreciate you taking the time. I know a lot of people are having issues connecting here, but they'll get to listen to it in the recorded versions, and they love all the little details. So appreciate you sharing those, and Chris, you know, helping set up with what your thoughts were with this particular chapter. I'm going to go into announcements. The first is Lost Paradigms, a community fund project, is doing an AMA in Discord at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time today. So that's a couple hours from now. Stop by to learn more about that project and their upcoming mint. Each Thursday, 2 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern, are community spaces. Merck and I hop into Twitter, talk about various CyberBroker topics, join, ask questions, please, because otherwise we talk economics the entire time. Tuesdays, 2 p.m. and 9 p.m. are creator calls in Discord. So if you have an idea about something you think CyberBrokers could use, or you could create, or you want to learn more about the community fund and how to submit ideas for that, stop in there. Tuesdays, Thursdays, 2 p.m., 9 p.m. Eastern. Get them on your calendars. Special events like this will typically use those spaces. And each week, before Monday noon, all events for the week will be added in a Discord calendar. So check there for any events for the week. That's a wrap. Thank you, everyone. And let's all say goodnight.
Indeed. Thanks, everybody. This is so much fun.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Great chatting.
Good night, all.